Some motorcycles aren't just machines, they're warnings. Over the years, engineers have pushed the limits of speed, power, and design, sometimes creating motorcycles so fast, so unstable, and so unpredictable that they became legends for all the wrong reasons. We're not talking about bikes that were simply hard to ride, we're talking about motorcycles that earned nicknames like Widowmaker and Death Wobble. Machines that terrified even professional riders, destroyed reputations, and in some cases, were pulled off the market because they were simply too dangerous to exist on the open road. Think about it. Motorcycles are already risky by nature. No airbags, no metal cage around you, just you, the engine, and the asphalt rushing under your tires. Now imagine riding a machine that was designed so aggressively, with so much power and so little control, that it turned into a death trap at high speeds. These weren't accidents of history. They were motorcycles celebrated in ads, raced by the fearless, and sold to regular riders who had no idea what they were getting into until it was too late. And the truth is, the more dangerous they became, the more obsessed people were with them, because danger sells. And these bikes didn't just promise speed, they promised adrenaline, rebellion, and bragging rights that came with a very real cost. Today, we're opening the vault to uncover the 5 deadliest motorcycles ever built. From Japanese superbikes that exploded onto the streets in the 1970s, to motocross monsters that could throw you off the seat like a rag doll, to concept machines that should have never left the drawing board. These are the bikes that blurred the line between genius engineering and pure madness. The motorcycles that became legends not because of how many lives they saved, but because of how many they destroyed. So strap in, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some motorcycles were never meant to be ridden by mortals. If there's one motorcycle that perfectly defines the phrase deadly legend, it's this one. The year was 1972. Kawasaki rolled out a machine that instantly sent shockwaves through the motorcycle world, the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4. On paper, it was a marvel. A 750cc two-stroke triple that delivered raw, unfiltered power in a way no street bike had before. At a time when most riders were used to tame engines and predictable handling, the H2 was like strapping yourself to a rocket. 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. A top speed well over 120 mph. Numbers that made it one of the fastest bikes on the planet. But here's the problem. While Kawasaki had built an engine that could rip the pavement apart, they hadn't exactly designed a frame or suspension to handle it. The result? A motorcycle that felt more like wrestling a wild animal than riding a machine. Riders would describe the experience as violent. The front end would lift unexpectedly under throttle, the back end would fishtail if you weren't careful, and at high speeds, the entire bike became twitchy, almost unpredictable. One small mistake, and the bike wasn't forgiving at all. That's when the nickname started. It didn't take long before riders, mechanics, and even motorcycle magazines started calling it the Widowmaker, a name that stuck, and for good reason. Stories began to spread. Riders who had underestimated the bike found themselves sliding across highways, thrown off in wheelies they didn't expect, or worse. Some managed to master it, but many didn't. The H2 became infamous not just for its speed, but for the trail of broken bones, wrecked bikes, and hospital visits left in its wake. And here's the twist. All of that danger only made it more popular. Young riders wanted the bragging rights of taming the Widowmaker. Owning one meant you had courage, or recklessness, beyond the average biker. Kawasaki sold thousands, not because it was safe, but because it was terrifying. Looking back today, the H2 Mach 4 is remembered as one of the most dangerous production motorcycles ever unleashed on public roads. A machine so fast, so brutal, and so unforgiving that even professional racers admitted it demanded total respect. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a gamble every time you twisted the throttle, and that gamble earned it a place at the top of motorcycle history's deadliest machines. But as wild as the Kawasaki was, it wasn't the only bike that left riders shaken, because just a couple decades later, Suzuki released a motorcycle that looked sleek, powerful, and modern, but carried a flaw so dangerous, it nearly ruined its reputation forever. By the mid-1990s, motorcycles had come a long way from the raw chaos of the 1970s. Technology had advanced, frames were stiffer, suspension was smarter, and manufacturers were promising bikes that weren't just fast, They were controllable, safe, predictable. At least, that was the idea. In 1997, Suzuki introduced what looked like a dream machine, the TL1000S. It had everything riders wanted: sleek design, modern styling, and a brand new 996cc liquid-cooled V-twin engine that produced over 120 horsepower. On paper, it could take on Ducati, dominate the streets, and give riders superbike thrills without the superbike price. But then came the problem. To keep costs down and try something different, Suzuki experimented with a unique rear suspension system, a rotary damper instead of a traditional shock. In theory, it was innovative. In practice, it was a disaster. At high speeds, the bike developed what riders started calling the death wobble. The front end would suddenly shake violently, a tank slapper so extreme that even experienced riders struggled to recover. 1 second you were accelerating hard, the next second the handlebars were ripping side to side, and the bike was trying to throw you off. Accidents began piling up. Newspapers wrote about it. Riders warned each other in forums. The TL1000S was no longer the budget Ducati killer. It was a bike with a deadly reputation. Suzuki tried to fix the problem. They added steering dampers. They adjusted the suspension. They offered recalls and modifications. But it was too late. The damage was done. The TL1000S had already cemented its nickname as a motorcycle that could betray you without warning. And that's the truly terrifying part. Unlike the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4, which wore its danger openly like a badge of honor, the TL1000S looked safe. It promised stability, promised modern engineering, and then turned around and put riders in the hospital. Today, collectors still talk about it as one of the most infamous bikes of the 1990s, a machine that had the potential to be great, but instead became remembered as one of the deadliest. And if you think a dangerous superbike is bad, imagine that same uncontrollable power unleashed not on the street, but on the dirt. Because our next motorcycle was so violent, so brutally powerful, that even professional motocross riders admitted it was like trying to tame a bomb on 2 wheels. If the Suzuki TL1000S was unpredictable on the asphalt, Honda had its own monster. Only this one lived in the dirt. In the mid-1980s, Honda unleashed a motocross bike that quickly gained a reputation for being more weapon than motorcycle, the CR500. On paper, it didn't sound too crazy. A 2-stroke dirt bike with a 500cc engine. But anyone who actually threw a leg over the CR500 knew the truth. This machine was savage. 2-strokes are already notorious for their sudden power delivery. Unlike 4-strokes, which build torque gradually, 2-strokes hit hard, like a light switch flipping from 0 to chaos in an instant. And the CR500 didn't just hit hard, it detonated. Riders described it as like holding onto an explosion. The throttle was brutal, the power band violent, and if you weren't perfectly balanced, the bike would launch you skyward or slam you into the dirt before you could even react. Even seasoned pros admitted the CR500 was a handful. The torque was so monstrous that it could tear through a rear tire in no time, and the sheer acceleration caught many riders off guard. For amateurs, it was a recipe for broken bones. And that's the thing. Motocross is already dangerous. Jumps, ruts, high-speed landings, every second demands control. Add in a bike that behaved like a bomb waiting to explode, and you had disaster. The CR500 earned nicknames like the Beast and the Widowmaker of the dirt. Stories spread of riders being thrown over the handlebars, wheelies flipping out of control, and bikes that felt like they were trying to buck you off at every opportunity. Honda never banned it, but by the late 1990s, they quietly phased it out. The official reason? 4-stroke technology had advanced enough to replace it. The unofficial truth? The CR500 was simply too wild for the average rider. Today, it's remembered as a legend of motocross. Some diehard fans still ride them, bragging about taming the beast. But most agree, the CR500 wasn't a dirt bike. It was a test of survival. And while the CR500 terrorized motocross tracks, the next motorcycle on our list terrified riders on the open road, long before modern helmets, brakes, or safety gear existed. A bike so fast for its time that it became known as the world's first superbike. and one of the most dangerous machines ever put on two wheels. Before Kawasaki's Widowmaker, before Suzuki's unstable twin, before Honda's dirt bike monster, there was the original killer. A motorcycle so advanced, so terrifying for its era, that it earned a place in history as the world's first superbike. This was the Vincent Black Shadow. Introduced in the late 1940s, the Black Shadow looked almost alien compared to other motorcycles of its day. While most bikes struggled to break 100 miles per hour, the Vincent shattered records with a top speed of 150 mph. In an era when average cars could barely reach 60, this was like strapping yourself to a jet. It wasn't just the speed, it was the sheer audacity. The Black Shadow was built with a massive 998cc V-twin engine, meticulously tuned for power. Its blacked-out cases and sinister design gave it a look as menacing as its performance. Even its name, Black Shadow, sounded like something from a nightmare. But here's the catch. The world in the 1940s wasn't ready for a motorcycle like this. Helmets were primitive, leather jackets were thin, road surfaces were unpredictable, and braking systems were laughably weak compared to the bike's speed. Riding a Black Shadow at full throttle wasn't just risky, it was suicidal. Stories of accidents spread quickly. Riders losing control at high speeds. Crashes that were almost always fatal. One journalist of the time famously wrote that, "The Vincent Black Shadow is not for the faint-hearted. If you ride it at top speed, you better have already said your goodbyes." Even seasoned racers admitted the bike demanded absolute respect. A single mistake at 140 or 150 mph, and you wouldn't walk away. That brutal reality gave the Vincent its deadly reputation. Yet, much like the Kawasaki Widowmaker decades later, the danger only fueled its legend. Owning a Black Shadow meant you were part of an elite group, riders willing to stare death in the face and twist the throttle anyway. Today, collectors pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for one. It's considered not just a classic, but a piece of motorcycling history, and every time someone restores or rides a Black Shadow, they're reviving one of the most dangerous chapters in the story of motorcycles. But as deadly as the Vincent was, it still followed the traditional formula of two wheels, one engine, and a daring rider. The last motorcycle on our list, it threw tradition out the window completely. A machine so extreme, it looked more like science fiction than reality. And riding it, let's just say, it was closer to a death wish than a thrill. Some motorcycles are dangerous because they were too fast for their time, others because their engineering was flawed, or their handling couldn't keep up with their power. But the last bike on our list, it was never meant to be ridden. It was an experiment, a statement, a mechanical monster that looked like it had rolled out of a sci-fi movie straight into reality. This was the Dodge Tomahawk. Unveiled in 2003 at the North American International Auto Show, the Tomahawk wasn't a motorcycle in the traditional sense. It was a concept built by Dodge, a company better known for muscle cars than two wheels. And instead of a standard motorcycle engine, Dodge decided to do something insane. They dropped a 500 horsepower, 8.3-liter V10 engine, the same one used in the legendary Dodge Viper, onto a frame with handlebars. The result? A two-wheeled, or rather, four-wheeled beast. Because the Tomahawk actually had two wheels at the front and two at the back, mounted close together, just to keep the thing upright. On paper, the numbers were almost unbelievable. 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, a theoretical top speed of nearly 400 miles per hour. That's faster than most airplanes at takeoff. But here's the catch. No human could actually control it. The Tomahawk wasn't designed with aerodynamics, balance, or real-world road conditions in mind. It was like strapping yourself to a rocket without wings. Even Dodge admitted it was more of a design study than a production motorcycle. Of course, that didn't stop people from fantasizing. What if someone actually rode it? What would it feel like to unleash a car engine's worth of power between your legs? The answer, most experts agreed, was simple. You wouldn't survive. That's why the Dodge Tomahawk is remembered as one of the deadliest motorcycles ever conceived. Not because of the number of crashes or injuries, but because riding it at its full potential would almost guarantee disaster. It wasn't just impractical, it was impossible. Dodge only built a handful, and they sold them as collector's items at astronomical prices. They were never street legal, never tested in any serious way, and never intended for the open road. But as a symbol of mechanical excess, the Tomahawk stands alone. It's proof that sometimes, engineers don't ask whether something should be built. They just build it, no matter how insane or dangerous it might be. And that's why it deserves a place among the deadliest motorcycles ever made. So there you have it. 5 motorcycles that didn't just make headlines, they terrified riders, scarred reputations, and in some cases, pushed the very limits of what a human being could control. From the raw chaos of Kawasaki's Widowmaker, to Suzuki's modern but unstable Death Wobble twin, to Honda's dirt track bomb, the legendary Vincent Black Shadow, and finally the insane Dodge Tomahawk. Each of these machines taught the same lesson. Speed without control is a recipe for disaster. But here's the crazy part. The danger didn't kill their legacy. It made them legendary. Because in the world of motorcycles, risk and thrill are inseparable. Riders don't chase safety. They chase freedom. They chase adrenaline. They chase that feeling of being alive, even if it comes with the shadow of danger. And that's why these bikes live on in history. Not because they were perfect, not because they were safe, but because they dared to go further than anyone thought possible, even if it meant stepping into deadly territory. So now the question is for you. Out of these 5 deadly machines, which one would you actually dare to ride? Would you gamble with the Widowmaker, wrestle the beast of dirt, or try your luck on a concept rocket like the Tomahawk? Let me know in the comments. I want to see who's fearless enough to pick one. And if you enjoyed diving into the dark side of motorcycle history, hit that like button, subscribe for more insane stories, and join us here at the Motorcycle Vault, where we unlock the legends, the myths, and yes, even the machines that probably should have never existed. Because in the end, these motorcycles didn't just change the way we ride. They changed the way we think about risk, freedom, and what it really means to be alive on 2 wheels.